From MTN, the Montana Television Network, this is Face the State.
Well, good Sunday morning. Chet Lehman with you here in just on the fringes of Yellowstone National Park with Dan Wenk, Superintendent of Yellowstone National Park. We're at the Yellowstone Association, a beautiful building here. Lots of construction outside here, Dan, going on. That's kind of what we're talking about here. Yellowstone National Park, as you know, is pretty popular. Your numbers breaking records as we go through this. As we work out of winter towards summer, where do you see Yellowstone going for the summer of 2016?
Well, I think we're coming off a year where we had 4.1 million visits to the park, and gas prices are continuing to be very affordable. We have a lot of publicity that's around Yellowstone National Park and the National Park Service this year with the centennial of the national parks and the Find Your Park campaign, which was last year an invitation. This year is, if you will, the celebration of our centennial. We have National Geographic, who's going to be doing a single focus issue on Yellowstone and the ecosystem. That's going to be in their May issue, coming out April 15th. So there's a lot of signs that point to another incredible year of visitation at Yellowstone, and we're doing everything we can to get ready for it, including what you see out in front of you here in Gardner, Montana.
Right, the Gardner Gateway project, one of the many projects going on in the park. We have the new hotel at Canyon, lots of construction going on with the new Xanterra contract and that. Again, the numbers, you've done a nice job bringing people in here. You mentioned 4.1 million, and I don't see any signs of it letting up. Is there going to be a point where we go down this road, though, Dan, where maybe Yellowstone doesn't need to be advertised so well?
Well, I think Yellowstone is not just Wyoming's and Montana's national park. It's really America's national park, and it's the world's first national park. And because of that, it gets a lot of attention on its own. I mean, it has over half the world's geysers are here in Yellowstone National Park. More than 10,000 thermal features. We probably have the greatest wildlife display in perhaps North America. So that combination, Yellowstone becomes a bucket list for many people, not only in this country but around the world. The states of Montana and Wyoming spend a lot of energy, talking about the Northwest Wyoming and Southwest Montana to advertise this place, and they've done a great job, as well as local groups, around here. So sometimes we're a little too popular, and unfortunately that shows in how long it might take people to get into some of the entrances, some of the jams, the wildlife jams they get into the park, finding parking places at some of the very popular sites in the park. So we are really concerned about the impact of visitation on the resources themselves.
2.2 million acres is a lot of land, but 330 miles of paved roads, not so much when you're dealing with just 5 ways in and out of that. Is that something that's going to have to be looked at as we go through this? 13,000 people in 1904, park can more than handle that. 4.1 million in 2015, with all likelihood more numbers. Is there going to have to be some changes made to not only roads and parking and those kind of things as we go through this, or changes on how people come and go from the park?
Well, there's going to have to be, I think we're going to have to determine what's the best way to manage Yellowstone National Park, because the first and foremost, we need to be sure we protect and preserve this place, because it's a gift not only to our generation but to future generations, and we need to do everything we can do to preserve this place. I want to give a little bit of a sort of a correction on numbers, because we talk about 4.1 visits. That's not distinct visitors.
Right.
In terms of distinct visitors, that's probably closer to 1.6 million distinct visitors. Many people go into the park, they will leave to one of the gateway communities, they'll come back 2 or 3 times. Those are 2 or 3 visits, but it is only one visitor who's doing that. So
true.
So numbers are important. Now, we have initiated a social science program in Yellowstone National Park. Last year, after the tremendous visitation that we had, we spent some time not only talking to our own employees about what the summer that was, because we had never seen anything like it, and what kind of challenges they faced, and what we may be able to do this year to make that a little better, for visitors inside the park. But we also went to the gateway communities. We went to Cook City and Silvergate, and to West Yellowstone and to Cody and to Gardner and sat down with the community leaders and said, what was that number of visitors like, you know, for your communities, and what can we do, how can we work together to make it better? So we're going to use a social science program. We're going to try to understand visitor expectations, how we're meeting those expectations. We're also going to try to understand how these number of visitors affect the resources of Yellowstone National Park. So what are we going to do? I don't know yet, but I know that I can't make any decisions unless I have the science on which to base those decisions, and we're trying to get that right now.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting approach to it. We were talking, I look back at the numbers, hard numbers, 500,000 cars in July. That's a big chunk of cars, and you mentioned West Yellowstone, you mentioned Gardner. I do know that none of those people are dropping out of space into Yellowstone. They are having to come from somewhere. So it's going to have to be, as I see it, and as you mentioned, it's going to have to be a cooperative effort. They got to come in from Montana or Wyoming or Idaho, and there's going back out the same direction. So that teamwork is going to have to be vital, as I see it, as you work down through this.
You know, it is vital, and one of the other things that happens to Yellowstone makes it a little bit different than some of the other national parks. Will we look at transportation systems? Yes, we will look. But the road system in Yellowstone National Park is part of the regional transportation system. It's a major north-south and east-west route, you know, through this part of the country. So it's not as easy as putting people, you know, building parking lots, putting people in buses and busing them through the park, because they still have a trip that they're making. So it's a very complicated, there's a complicated solution, and you know, we're going to work hard to see if we can find it, and work with our partners, with the states and local communities to figure out what the best way is to approach this.
Do we know what the capacity is? I mean, you know, there's so many rooms, there's so many camp spots, there's so many of that, but we have this, your biologists spent a great deal of time talking about how many bison the park can hold, and we know how many bears there are in that. Do we have numbers on this 2.2 million acres of land, what the capacity for humankind is in this?
You know, we really don't. And, you know, over the history of Yellowstone National Park, we've studied a lot of things about the geology, about the wildlife, about the fisheries, the historic resources. You know, we study the archaeology. Probably the least studied thing in Yellowstone right now is the visitors. And that's why we are initiating I think, a very robust social science program so we can understand the visitors. Part of that understanding is capacity. Right now we're working with the Department of Transportation. We're working with our office in Washington, D.C. and the regional office. We have people who deal with congestion management. We have people who will help us understand the capacities, you know, of roads, parking lots, you know, but right now I can't give you a number. I hope to be able to give you a number and everyone else pretty soon. And you asked earlier about, you know, will we build more roads? Will we increase capacity? And I think we are looking in especially hard-hit areas or very popular areas. For example, Grand Prismatic Spring, and in that area is, we don't have enough parking in that area. The Norris Geyser Basin, we don't have enough parking. But how much do we need? Where should it go and where do you put it? You can't just expand parking areas in Yellowstone National Park because of the thermal features, the geology, the incredible resources that we have, that our first and highest priority is to protect those resources.
Sure, a 9-story parking garage right there at Old Faithful would be ideal, except for everything that you want to go see at Old Faithful.
Well, you know, if the National Park Service have to found this great place today, we probably would not be building parking lots at that size at Old Faithful, because it certainly influences the amount of water that recharges the thermal features in that area. And so those are kinds of things that we have to be very careful about, and it's different perhaps than building almost any place else in the country or the world.
Do you find it fascinating? Your office is just down the road here at Mammoth, and in the summertime, you're in the only place in these 3 states that have Yellowstone that you actually have to worry about traffic. Do you find that just fascinating? I mean, you're in Yellowstone National Park. I live in one of the major cities in Montana. I don't really have to worry about, not like you do. It can be a day trip from your office to the lake.
Well, there's no doubt that you actually plan your trips in the park very carefully, you know, and I think it's something that we would encourage visitors to do, is plan their trips very carefully. If you leave Mammoth Hot Springs before 8 o'clock in the morning, you can probably get most any place you want to get in the park in a pretty efficient manner. However, if you leave at 10 o'clock, to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you're going to encounter a lot of traffic, most likely encounter wildlife jams and other opportunities to spend time in your car that you didn't plan on when you started. So I think people, if they look at our websites, our planning guides, and the help we can give them, but we would encourage people to really think about where they want to go, when they want to go, and understand some of those traffic patterns and flows.
Definitely not a place you hurry through.
Well, you shouldn't hurry through.
Right.
I mean, if you come in the first part of May where there is very little traffic, what a great time to take your time exploring Yellowstone National Park and to take advantage of uncrowded parking lots, uncrowded roads, or trails and front country trails. So, to just be able to sit and to contemplate and to have a little emotional renewal. No better place, perhaps, in the world.
You shouldn't have told people that's our little secret there, Dan. That's the part that we need to know. I think it's an interesting thing that the situation you have here in Yellowstone, because your winter guests, you have that very regulated. You know at any given time the maximum amount of people that are going to come into your park. Are there possibilities down the road that we're going to see that same kind of map for the summer? Because there's a finite amount of places where they can go and how they're going to be able to get there.
Is it possible? Sure, it's possible. I think that we do have to determine if there have to be limits to the amount of people that we allow into the park, or wonder what circumstances we allow people into the park. We're nowhere near that decision. That's a decision that will be made not just by the National Park Service, just as winter use was not a decision that was made just by the National Park Service. It's made with great public involvement and great consideration for all the values that are at play within this ecosystem in Yellowstone.
Do you have any idea? You've been here since 2011.
5 years.
5 years. Do you have any idea where this is going to go? I mean, would 2011, I did the math, I think, from the time that you took over until the end of 2015, 17 million visits to the park is the math I had according to your numbers.
I greeted them all individually.
You did, and I know you did. You're very good about that, at all the gates at the same time. Could you have foreseen that? I mean, did we kind of have an idea of that? I think everybody knew that Yellowstone is popular. It's going to continue to be popular, but the numbers that we've seen here in the last couple of years, I've lived here for 25 years. They do seem a little surprising to me.
Well, I think everybody was caught a little bit off guard last year, and I think it's we don't know exactly why we had nearly a 17% increase in visits to Yellowstone National Park last year, but we do know that we had a lot of attention to the National Park Service overall through the Find Your Park campaign, and the launch of the Centennial campaign. I think was dramatic, and I think it's starting to reach a lot of people. But we also saw gas prices that were probably the most affordable of those 5 years was last year. This year they're perhaps even going to be more affordable. So is that of concern? It's not of concern in thinking that people are going to get to see their national park. It is concern in terms of how we're going to make that the best visit possible for people when they get here. I don't think it was foreseen, and I don't want, this may be an aberration, in terms of that the trend in visitation. What happens next year if gas prices are $4.50 a gallon? How will that affect visitation? So we really have to take the long view. We can't do all of our planning and based on what's happened last year and potentially this year. So we really have to understand it a little bit a longer view.
With the recent contract with Xanterra, the extended contract with a lot of requirements for the organization to do some improvement. Let's talk about what we're going to see in the park in 2016, because some of that's coming to fruition as we're going through Canyon Hotel and the amazing work that's gone on, the really interesting work that was going on with that facility. What else are we going to be seeing here in the next couple of years, Dan?
Well, first of all, let's talk about what you've seen already from that contract. The Lake Hotel is it's the oldest hotel that we have in Yellowstone National Park, and it's a grand hotel. At this point, the improvements that have been made to that have really restored it to its original, if you will, significance and majesty. That hotel is 125 years old this year. It's going to be celebrating its 125th anniversary. The work that they're doing at Canyon Village, replacing the temporary cabins that were put in the 1950s with 5 new lodges that are about 80 rooms each lodge. 3 of those lodges are already open. The remaining 2 will open in midsummer this year. So that's an incredible improvement to visitor services in that area. It's an incredibly popular area of the park, as you know. We've also returned cabins that were being used for employees in the Mammoth area and the Old Faithful area are being returned to visitor use. And we're building dormitories because those employees need someplace to stay. You're going to see, over the next couple of years, you're going to see kitchens starting to be improved. You're going to see the Fishing Bridge RV park is going to be improved. We're relocating the Mammoth Hotel within the next few years. Will be open on a year-round basis because significant work will start on that this fall. The administrative function for Xanterra is going to another historic building that they're working on right now. The National Park Service has been doing, we opened the Albright Visitor Center, rededicated the Albright Visitor Center last year. Road construction continues to be a major hindrance, if you will, to some of this traffic flow, but we completed a major section of road between Norris and Golden Gate last year, and we'll start the next section of road this year. So there's always something going on in terms of trying to make these facilities ready to serve visitors well into the future.
The beautiful thing I like about what the construction is from where we've come is some of this construction, a lot of it, I mentioned the new facility, a canyon and all of that, being done so green and taking care, yes, you're doing building in the park and that's the reality of it, that's the human footprint, but you're doing it in such a way that you're really trying to, I mean, we're not feeding bears on the dump anymore. We've come a long way in the last few years with some of that, and I like to see where it's going. That must be exciting for you to see that the work that we're doing is managing the resources in a lot of ways as well.
Actually, I think we're contracting our footprint on the land. You know, Canyon's a great example. We're not going to be on nearly as much of a footprint of our developments on that land, and it is going to be far more sustainable, you know, in terms of the buildings and the operation. Also in the Canyon area, just for example, we haven't really touched those trails and overlooks for probably 50 to 70 years in some cases. So this year we're putting out for bid some of the first improvements. The Inspiration Point, for example, that hasn't been open for the last 2 or 3 years. There's going to be a major renovation going on at Inspiration Point, so that's going to be another public access point that's going to be put back into place. Also starting to work on the brink of the Upper Falls and Uncle Tom's on the opposite side of the river. So we're doing things not just in terms of, if you will, hotels and restaurants and roads, but we're also looking at those visitor opportunities to really experience the park, to make sure that they're accessible, they're safe, and they're in great condition.
Still with the challenge of doing it only in about a 6-month, if you're lucky, window of time.
Well, it's the construction season in Yellowstone is challenging, and you know, when we, for example, when they worked on the Lake Hotel, you know, we have something that we set up as a contractor's camp, and that camp is in place just so we can work year-round in some places. We haven't had to do that at Canyon. That's you know, we get in there in early May, we work through October, and Xanterra and their contractors have done an incredible job, and we're gonna be ready for visitors, and they're wonderful facilities, and I hope people, they're full. I mean, if people want to have an opportunity to stay in Yellowstone National Park, they should be calling that reservation line soon.
This is your second time in Yellowstone. You had spent some of your early career with the Park Service in Yellowstone. How different is it? You know,
it's the interesting thing is, I would tell you that Yellowstone is a healthier park today than it was when I was here between 1979 and 1984. When I was here before, I was the park landscape architect, and my sphere of influence was relatively small. As superintendent, you know, I'm involved in a lot more things, and I love the challenge. I love the opportunities we have, but it is a better condition in a park right now because grizzly bears have gone from perhaps 200 bears in and around Yellowstone National Park to now in the primary conservation area we have over 700 bears. The wolves have been reintroduced. You've reestablished predator-prey relationships. One thing in the early 80s, we didn't have the problem with invasive species of plants to the extent we have now, or fish. You know, the whole restoration of the cutthroat trout population on Lake Yellowstone, or restoration of the rivers and streams throughout the park, is something that is really going to speak very well to the future of the park and the health of the park. So The difference, I get to deal with a lot more people and a lot more issues, and I enjoy it. I think we work hard with our local communities and states to make sure that we're doing the things that are in the best interest of Yellowstone National Park.
It is interesting. You mentioned the grizzly bears. The population is done very well. It's phenomenal what has just happened in the last few years, not just since 1979, even in the last 10, 15 years, the numbers have been great. Your bison population is doing very well, and that story is constantly hanging around out there. We're in Gardner, where attention in Montana has been drawn to that issue as well. Things are progressing in that as we speak as well. What does 2016 hold for that situation, Dan?
Well, if it was only intention in Montana to the bison population, that would be one issue. It's actually it's if not nationwide, it's worldwide attention to what's happening with bison in this arena that we're in right now. We have a bison population of just under 5,000 animals. We have a commitment through an interagency bison management plan that was signed by the Secretaries of Interior and Agriculture with the Governor of Montana that will manage the bison to a target population of about 3,000. We've been managing over the past 10 years to about a 4,000 level population. So right now, this is the time of year where bison are migrating out of the park. We have state and tribal hunts that take place in the Gardner Basin. They have removed probably over 300 bison so far this year. But our intention was to have a decreasing population, which means we have to remove plus or minus 800 bison from the population on an annual basis in compliance with that agreement. So those 300 bison have been removed through hunts. Hunting will continue, but we will start to look at, as soon as this weekend, we will start to look at capture of bison and shipping those bison with Native American tribes for Native American tribe use for cultural and nutritional purposes.
The part you mentioned since 1979 when you started in the park, it's a healthier park. It's a smarter park too, isn't it? I mean, we've learned, you mentioned the grizzly bears. We've learned so much more about the grizzly bears since then. We've learned so much more about the bison. We're going to learn from what you're telling me about the human factor in that as well, the last population to study in that. The park is smarter, at least as I see it, than we were.
I think we know a lot more. I think we research is constant. When I was here in the early 80s, we had a resource management staff and a research staff that was small in comparison to today's efforts that we do. But I think it's incredibly important that my predecessors, recognized and took action to put those things in place so that we do know more about wildlife health. We do know more about the raptors. We do know more about the fish and the span of the animals and the plants in Yellowstone National Park.
And fire. We've learned a little bit since 1988 about that as well.
Well, that was a big lesson, and and I think we are very engaged with management of fires, and as you know, that if we have any fire that's started in Yellowstone National Park, if it's started by other than natural causes, we put that fire out. But if it's started by a natural cause, we will evaluate that fire to determine if it can be managed for the benefit of the park, or if we need to put the fire out. And that's a constant issue throughout the summer.
Before we wrap this up, Dan, let's talk about this summer. This is a big celebration for the National Park Service, and you get to host a bunch of that. Let's talk about what's happening.
Well, there's a few things. Obviously, we talked about a little bit about the Lake Hotel, the National Geographic issue, but it's really going to culminate, with the Gardner Gateway project. We're going to celebrate an evening at the Arch with the Yellowstone National Park. We'll celebrate the National Park Service Centennial. We are certainly looking forward to a great event here in Gardner with the Yellowstone in front of the Arch with Yellowstone National Park as a background. We are looking at dignitaries, celebrities from the National Park Service and from perhaps the world of entertainment that are going to be here, and more announcements will be on that later. But we think it's a great opportunity to celebrate the partnership that it took between the National Park Service, the community of Gardner, the Yellowstone Park Foundation, the state of Montana, to really bring this together to create not only an improved entrance worthy of Yellowstone National Park, but also an entrance worthy of the state of Montana. as people leave Yellowstone and go into Montana.
I find it fascinating because when tourists originally came to the park, they'd stop at the train station down here in the bottom of the valley, and this is where you saw it, and the Roosevelt Arch was all of that. And it feels to me with the Gardner Gateway project that's going on that we're kind of getting back to that. We're bringing it back to that, the gateway part of it again. Is that a fair assumption of what we're talking about here?
Well, I think we're recognizing that not only the historic importance of the Gardner Gateway community, but it's the number of entrances that come into Yellowstone National Park. The north entrance through Gardner, Montana, has been increasing. It vies on an annual basis for the second or third most used entrance into the park, and so it is the historic entrance. It is an entrance that it is in back to the celebration using this entrance. I think symbolically we're saying, this is our world's first national park. Look what has been created in terms of how we recognize the natural and cultural history of our nation through our national parks. But it all started here. And it really all started in Gardner, Montana, as the first entrance, as people came to see and to explore and to appreciate the resources that have made this country so incredible.
I gotta know, your office is in the park, you live in the park, all of that. Do you ever just get to go and be a tourist, Dan? Do you ever just get to go and visit some places?
I have a Harley, and on more than a few Sunday mornings, I'll get up and I'll get on my Harley and I'll just ride through the park and I'll just enjoy the park with everybody else. And most people have no idea who I am, which is just great.
I think that's the fascinating part. I've spent a lot of time in Yellowstone over the years, and you never know who you're going to stand next to at Old Faithful, and people from all over the world standing there. I mean, that's a unique place in itself. Every 90, 91, 92 minutes, it's the third largest city in Wyoming or something like that. That is fascinating. That's interesting that you get a chance to go and do that. Lucky you.
Well, I think I don't get enough of a chance, Monday through Friday, and it is a great place. To this time of the year to go out and stand in the middle of Lamar Valley and see the most watchable wolves, perhaps in the world, and to see them in their natural environment and to see how they interact as a pack and interact with other packs is something that is perhaps almost unique opportunity for people.
The phone calls about the bison, the grizzly bears, the parking and all of that, all of it's still worth it?
Oh, it's more than worth it, because this is the best job in the National Park Service. I mean, some may argue with me, but it's the best job, and it's the best job because the passion people have about this place is incredible. And the fact that we get those calls, can you imagine if we didn't? Can you imagine if nobody cared? The fact that they care so passionately about this place makes everything worth it.
Well, Dan, thank you for coming into town to talk to us here as we got that set up here at the Yellowstone Association, right outside the up-and-coming Gardner Gateway project. We look forward to the celebrations as they come our way. I can't wait to see what you've intrigued me with the secrecy of who's going to be here for all of that. Again, all summer long, right?
Well, the big celebration is on the 25th. It's going to have limited capacity, so it's probably going to be a ticketed event. But yeah, we're celebrating the centennial of the National Park Service all summer long through programs and things that we do in the park, and hopefully people will really understand and appreciate not only this park, but parks throughout the country and perhaps the world.
That's fantastic. Dan Wenk, again, Superintendent of Yellowstone National Park, joining us on this Sunday morning. Thank you for sitting down and chatting with us, Dan. Appreciate that very much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
And that's this week in Face the State.
You've been watching Face the State, a presentation of MTN, the Montana Television Network.